We need to remember the reasons why we are alive and why we're fighting for our lives as much as we need the things that are keeping us alive. Hi, I'm Constanza Rader. I'm the founder and CEO of Hearts Need Art, creative support for patients and caregivers. And we are a nonprofit here in San Antonio, Texas, and we take our artists, musicians, and writers into healthcare spaces, really to make sure no one is suffering alone and to bring the healing power of the arts into hospitals. I want to come on today to share why the sparrow is a really important symbol in our organization. And really, the story goes back to kind of my early childhood. So, will indulge me if we can start there. I grew up in a very musical family, and as growing up as a young person, I watched my aunt Madeline sing the song His Eyes on the Sparrow and other music at the bedside of some of my um, grandparents and great grandparents and other aunts and uncles that were sick and even on their deathbed sometimes. And that song had a really special meaning in our family. It was very encouraging and uplifting, and just precious and beautiful. And when I was 13, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And so then I was sick. And so my Aunt Madeline sang that song for me. And it was so powerful. It was this beautiful way that she said how much she loved me and cared for me. I went through 130 weeks of chemotherapy and came out the other side. I actually studied music in school myself. And then I started volunteering on an adult oncology unit here in San Antonio, Texas. And what I found was that so many people were in the hospital for weeks and months at a time, even very often alone. I was never alone when I was in the hospital. In the pediatric hospital, there was always someone there with me, whether it was a parent or a volunteer that was at the hospital. There were so many activities. And so I was kind of shocked when I realized that, man, there is so much loneliness and depression, and just the environment was so dark. And I knew that it didn't have to be that way. So that's when I started going room to room and singing at the bedside of patients. And one of the patients I met while I was doing this, well, her name was Gracie, and I have permission to tell her story. She was a young adult, and she was recently diagnosed also with leukemia. But she was alone when I went to go see her for the first time. She'd just been diagnosed. I went into her room, and she was kind of huddled up in a ball in her bed, and her face was just flat, like just no affect. And I went in and introduced myself, and I asked if there was some music she would like to hear. And she said, "No, I'm not really that artsy. I don't even really listen to music that much." I was like, "That's fine. I can come back another day, and if you change your mind, I'll be here." So I turned to leave, but then she stopped me and she said, "Actually, if you know a Christian song, I really feel like I would like to hear something like that right now." And so that song came to my head, His Eyes on the Sparrow. And so I sang, "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." And as I sang through each verse of the song, I watched the tension visibly leave her body and tears come to her eyes. And when I finished, she just looked up and said, "Thank you." And I got to work with Gracie a lot because she was in the hospital with us for about 6 months because they couldn't discharge her to go home for various complicated reasons, and her family lived far away, so she was alone a lot in the hospital. But her favorite day was Wednesday because I would come and sing for her, and then we would have a group for young adults where we would get together and sing music and share stories and all of that. And thankfully, they were able to get her into remission, and she got to go home and spend time with her family. But then just a few months later, they found out that her cancer had returned and she was back in the hospital. And as soon as I found out, I ran to her room to go see her because this is the worst nightmare for a cancer survivor. So I just expected devastation when I walked in. But instead, this time, I found her sitting on her bed, smiling, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. I want to show you something." And she pulled me over to her bed and she rolled up her sleeve. And there on her arm was a brand new tattoo that she had designed herself of a sparrow. And she said, "I will never forget that first song you sang for me. And I know now that no matter what happens, that he is watching over me." Well, I left the room and just felt bawled. I don't know any other way to respond to that. It was so powerful. And unfortunately, they weren't able to get her back into remission. But before she went home on hospice, she called me into her room again. And she grabbed my face and she said, "We need more. We need more art and music. We need more reasons to get out of our isolation and connect with each other. We need to remember the reasons why we are alive and why we're fighting for our lives as much as we need the things that are keeping us alive. Because even if our lives are going to be shorter, they can absolutely be fuller." And she made it very clear that while she appreciated that I was there doing music once a week, that there were thousands of patients that were going to come after her that needed more. And she charged me to do more, to bring visual arts and writing and other art forms into the hospital, to bring something, activities that people could do every day of the week, so they weren't just languishing by themselves in their rooms. And I don't know how you say no to that. And, I'd felt the calling to do something more with this for a long time. So it really felt like God was giving me that kick in the pants to, okay, go do it. And so I Googled how to start a nonprofit. And in 2016, I incorporated Hearts Need Art as a nonprofit. And since then, thousands and thousands of patients have received these services, have had companionship in the darkest moments of their lives, have had ways to express the inexpressible that they're going through, have had the opportunity to create meaning and return to joy in spite of their circumstances. And that's because of Gracie, and that's because of a sparrow. So I want to take a moment to say thank you to anyone who's given, who's volunteered, who's come in and provided music and arts for our patients, everyone that's ever been on our board, anyone who's ever supported me personally and listened to me as I cried, as I share some of these amazing stories that we get to witness. It really makes a difference. Sometimes something as simple as a common sparrow, when you do it in love, can transform hearts. So thank you for joining us as we work to create a world where no one suffers alone.